What's up, everybody? How is everybody doing tonight? Tonight, we are joined for the World of Music podcast by two amazing people, imJMB and Billy Boomer. First, I'd like to introduce you to imJMB. Guys, first, I'd like to introduce to imJMB.
Hey, everybody. How are you this evening?
And next, Billy Boomer.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing?
These are both musicians and people that I've had the privilege to become friends with over the past few months and years. I'd like to start off with Billy. What got you into music?
My dad's been a musician his whole life, pretty much. So a lot of my influence and urge to get into it kind of came from him, to be honest with you. When I was about 13 years old, I had a hockey injury. I was kind of laying around the house, and I asked him if he could teach me some guitar chords, and he taught me my first bar chord, and I kind of ran with that, and have been playing since then.
Very cool. JMB?
My story is actually not too far off. Most of my introduction to music came from my father, who had been in several bands throughout his life. And around the time of my birth, he was actually in a Rush cover band and kind of in his own little band. And there's actually pictures of me asleep on the studio floor as a toddler with earmuffs on. And as years went on, my father had done his best to get me into music as far as playing went. I had drums, I had a guitar, I had a keyboard. I never really took interest in much except for the keyboard in my, 8, 9, 10-year-old span. And I want to say around 14 or 15, I was listening to one of my father's Rush albums, Exit Stage Left. And on that album is a short acoustic piece that Alex Lifeson performed called Brune's Bane. And the piece hit me in such a unique and powerful way that I had decided at that moment guitar is an instrument that I actually need to pursue, something I need to take seriously. And I decided that even if I never became a good guitar player, I would learn to play that song flawlessly before I gave up. And it was, in fact, the very first song I ever learned to play.
Very cool. Which actually is a good segue into my next question. JMB, what were some of your influences aside from Rush as that helped form you as a musician?
Well, I can't bypass Rush in that question simply because for the earliest portion of my playing, Rush was without question the heaviest influence. In time, though, I had been introduced to Dream Theater as well as Liquid Tension Experiment. And I had taken more to Liquid Tension Experiment initially. Same guitar player, I should mention that. For anybody who doesn't know, Liquid Tension Experiment was a side project that had been started by a couple of the members of Dream Theater, John Petrucci, the guitar player, Mike Portnoy, the drummer, Jordan Rudess, who later joined Dream Theater after the first Liquid Tension album. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank, but a fairly well-known bass player, neither here nor there.
Derek
The music of
Shrinian?
Liquid no. That's a keyboardist.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry.
Either way, Liquid Tension Experiment had appealed to me more because it was a very experimental form of music. It was all instrumental. In time, as there was only 2 Liquid Tension albums, I got more heavily into Dream Theater because their discography was wider and still being updated. And I want to say probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, I got very heavy into a band called Periphery. I had been following their main guitar player, Misha Mansour, long before Periphery's full band inception, listening to his demos. It was a very different style of music than anything I had ever heard. People refer to it these days as djent. And my influences as a result now are kind of all over the place. I would say that my overall favorite guitar player is still John Petrucci. As far as rhythmic things go, definitely Periphery-esque influence. But I also love people like Andy Timmons. I look to Steve Vai for certain unique attributes and things like that. It's not all in one centered area anymore.
Very cool. Well, I know a lot of like everything you said there is just stuff that I've been listening to for years. Billy, what about you?
Ah, well, I'm primarily now in my life. I'm primarily a bass player, but like I said when I introduced myself, I started playing guitar when I was 13. Um, I would say my influences then and now are Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, of course, like Jimmy Page, um, James Hetfield, Zach Wild. My bass influences have been John Paul Jones, Geddy Lee, of course, and then Cliff Burton and Jason Newsted. Kind of all over the place, and kind of still am to this day. I take a lot of influence and a lot of inspiration from a lot of different people.
That's wow, that I'm sure goes without saying. Um Now, how has music impacted your lives? I know now a little bit I know about you, Billy. I know how it leads into yours, but I'm interested to know how music has led into your professional lives as well.
Um, it, well, I'm kind of a session studio musician at this point. I still like to play live, and I still do play live to this day. But I got into that just by playing with people, word of mouth. Um, like I said, I kind of primarily a bass player, and I have been for quite a while now. But the circle I ran with wasn't a lot of bass players. Everybody played guitar or drums. So I was kind of just took it upon myself to pick up the bass and play and jam with everybody. Um, a lot of the people I've played with over the years kind of picked up some popularity locally. Um, and I just kind of started like sitting in, going into the studio with them and just hanging out and maybe writing a couple bass lines here and there with them. If somebody had problems coming up with something, I would interject with something I thought would be cool or fit the fill or would help the overall mix. It's just it's just been something I've been in love with my whole life, pretty much since I was like a teenager. It's always been a part of my life.
Very cool. JMB?
Well, as far as music has impacted my professional life, that's kind of it's a difficult question to answer because it's one of those that could go on for a while, and I'll try to condense it. In some ways, music has had a pretty minimal effect on my professional life, honestly. I have been in a couple of bands. I have been a live performer, which I have absolutely grown to thoroughly enjoy, even when it's not necessarily music that I consider to be in my wheelhouse or personal preference. When you're playing a good show in front of a crowd who's not there but present, because there is absolutely a difference, and I'm sure Billy can attest to that.
Absolutely.
It makes all the difference in the world. It's a wonderful feeling. There is an intangible exchange of energy between you and the crowd that is beyond description. Again, if you're playing a good show with a crowd that is present in that moment. Branching off of that, if I'm going to be honest, I've always found writing music to be kind of an arduous task. I'm a perfectionist, which is sometimes of great benefit and sometimes of great detriment. In the detrimental regard, it's very difficult for me to sit down with something that I have composed and say, yes, this is good, this is finalized, I'm happy with this. And instead, I often find myself thinking, well, this person could do it better, or this influence or my hero could have done this better. And there are aspects where that thought process allows me to widen the coverage, I guess you could say, of what it is that I'm trying to compose. But then there's also moments where I'm sure I'll look back later and say, I should have stuck with that idea. It wasn't bad. Um, Branching off even further into that, though, I have been working very hard toward crafting my audio engineering skills. And that leads into things such as music production, video production, even simple things like narration have some form of engineering that has to be done in order for things to sit appropriately, sound the way you expect them to. And there's very high standards when it comes to things like that. I'll kind of leave it there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure we can get into that a little bit later, and in fact, we will, uh, in the some questions I have just popped into my mind. But like I kind of want to go a little bit into where you guys feel. How do you feel the medium, I guess, has changed, especially in the last, let's say, past 2 decades with the the rise of YouTube and different technology, even this Twitch and things like that. How you feel? What you've seen that's changed and how you feel about it. Um, JMB, why don't you go ahead and give this a kickstart, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, I think it's both the best and worst thing that has ever happened to the music industry for a lot of different reasons. If we were to start with the negative attribute, once upon a time, in order to become a successful musician, you had to be at the right place at the right time, and you had to really have something special. Once you were discovered, there was a decent likeliness, in my opinion anyway, that you could stand to rise to some level of notoriety or success. However, on the opposing side of that, with the advent of the internet and technology, there is such an overwhelming net of people who are considerably more talented than a lot of people, even those who have gained their level of notoriety, that it's become not only difficult to find a space in the industry, but when you do, there's very little money to go around. So those who expect to or hope to make their living in a musical endeavor will more often than not find themselves disappointed and quite possibly even financially crippled. That being said, though, one of the best advantages with the advancement of all of this is, as you said, the technology. We are now, for the very first time, in a position where pretty much anybody who is willing to put forth the time and effort and a few $100s can record, cut, mix, and send out a virtually studio quality album. And as opposed to a time where you used to have to spend hundreds, thousands of dollars to be in a professional studio, to have an engineer who would sit there with you, do the recording, the mixing, the cutting, the editing, all of that. Again, if you're willing to put forth a little bit of time and a little bit of money, you can kind of do that yourself now. So for the people who are out there, like myself, in fairness, who do not have any grandeur illusions of making their living playing music, this is a wonderful way and an amazing time to have your music heard without having to go through a lot of the trials and tribulations that musicians of the past have had to do. Not only that, but that technology has moved its way into the equipment that's used for musicians. Speaking as a guitar player, I can only kind of fairly shed my experience with that. But there was a time not even all that long ago where tube amps, in my opinion, were absolutely unbeatable as far as having a desirable tone goes.
Hmm.
And I was among millions of people who had stated on multiple occasions, nothing will ever beat tubes. Tubes will always sound the best. Screw digital, screw solid state. And in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years now, with the upgrades to things like the Fractal Audio Axe effects, the Kemper Profiler, the Line 6 Helix, and now dozens of others, that gap audibly between tube amps and digital modelers has almost all but completely closed. And what little gap there is still in there almost completely disappears in the context of a mix. And that in and of itself is of a lot of different advantages, if for no other reason than the fact that they're more affordable in the long term than most tube amps are,
Oh
than
yeah.
for the fact that they are more reliable, more consistent, more hardy, and they will grow with you, as opposed to a tube amp, which more often than not does what it does and may do amazingly well. But if you decide that you want to go from being a blues player to a metal player and you don't already have a high gain amplifier, you're SOL. You're probably looking at a new piece of gear.
Hmm.
Yeah, Billy. What about how do you feel about this situation with that?
Well, I agree with almost everything JMB said. I like being the more the recording aspect of music nowadays. When I first started off in this, you know, my friends would rent out studio time, which was really expensive, like really expensive. Nowadays, when I help people record or go record something with somebody, everybody's doing it in their house. They might have a nice home studio set up, but it's all done in their house now. I can't remember the last time I actually stepped into a professional quote unquote studio. And the things that they record and we record are just, they sound great. There's really no difference between having it mixed and recorded in a professional studio anymore. Um, which is also a different kind of subject, because you're seeing a lot of professional studios just kind of go by the wayside. You don't hear a lot about professional studios anymore because people can just do it in their homes. And musicians are making their own studios, like Steve Vai. He's got an amazing home studio. Um, he just got sick of paying for studio time, so he made his own studio. Um, and I think that's just something you're going to see a lot of people just get into if they're interested in breaking into the music business, just making their own recordings. It's pretty much the only way to do it nowadays, it seems like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think even with the way the technology is developed, I mean, as somebody who streams, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to imagine, let's say, just 7 or 8 years ago, the need for me to personally have, as part of a gaming or even just just in general, of having this equipment in my house. Like I have a mixer, I have a preamp, all the stuff that I bought from Mike. Like I walk into Guitar Center near me, and the guys know that I'm not there to play an instrument because I'm coming in there with all these questions about, well, how does this hook up to the microphone? How can I interface this with my computer? I mean, what do you guys think about that? Like overall, like, have you seen that kind of change in addition to like having like the recording studios, like you said, Billy, moving into the home, like just
Hmm.
in general, like how do you guys, and like either of you can answer this and we can have a discussion about this. So that's actually what I'd like to do. I mean, like, how do you think that this is like the rise of streaming and other things like YouTube have really impacted the music industry? Because a lot of the equipment now we use is the same equipment that was, I would say, to a large extent, like even let's say 15 years ago, primarily in the realm of things that musicians and audio engineers would work with.
You start this one off first, Billy.
Um, I'm not too like, I'm self-admittedly, I'm I'm kind of a plug in and play kind of guy. I just show up, plug in my bass, whatever interface they're using, um, and just kind of play and do my thing. I just kind of recently started getting into figuring out my own kind of home recording situation. And I'm still kind of messing around with that. Um, so I can't speak too much about that because I'm not too knowledgeable about it at this point.
There's nothing wrong with that. I myself, I'm a big advocate of embracing the future when it comes to how it affects the things that you do. So, for me personally, for example, when I'm streaming, as much as I love gear, and I must admit, I love gear, I love toys, I love buying something new and learning how to use it and putting it through its paces and listening to the different sounds that it has, or, checking out different ways that it can impact a certain sound or be implemented, so on and so forth. But I will also be the first person to admit that, excuse me, when it comes to something like streaming or these days recording, I now often stray away from analog equipment. So if I'm streaming, I use the VST mixer built into OBS. I use the compressor and the noise gate built into OBS. Similarly, when I'm recording something, my chosen DAW is Presonus Studio One. And it has, like most DAWs, a plethora of different VST plugins and instruments that you can use that automatically come with it. There are, of course, just like with most things, a lot of third party ones that you can purchase. Some are free, some are very expensive, some do better than others, so on and so forth. I think the best way to kind of address the question that you're having is that slowly but surely, as technology proceeds to advance, a lot of these things are kind of merging from total polar opposite directions into one thing. So, once upon a time, aside from things like, Nintendo and Sega Genesis, even back at that time, computers were in competition as far as gaming went. And there were always clear, distinct advantages between one or the other, as there still are. However, over the last 15, 20 years, those advantages have gotten smaller. And a lot of it boils down to, personal preference. It's very similar, in my opinion, in that regard. I think the big thing to recognize is that generally there is no one size fits all for any situation. Sometimes, depending on how deeply enveloped you want to get in the technological aspect of things or the understanding of how things work, will greatly dictate the direction that you go. If you don't know how a compressor works, uh, looking at a VST plugin might be kind of uh, scary because of how complicated it looks. Whereas some people are better off getting a piece of old analog hardware, plugging it in, and it's only got a couple of knobs. There are some people who need that tactile feel. And you also run into situations where you have two digital modelers for guitar that are, for all intents and purposes, kind of similar: the Fractal Audio Axe FX2 and the Kemper Profiler. There are people who prefer one over the other, not necessarily because of their tonal capabilities or their audible differences, but because the Kemper Profiler, for example, is a lot more plug and play. Kind of like Billy said, that's the kind of thing that you can buy, plug right into, and start playing and get good tones immediately. Whereas the Fractal Audio Axe FX, which is what I prefer, is something that if you enjoy tweaking or you enjoy having ultimate, limitless control over every little parameter, that's more for you. And to me, that opens up a broader spectrum of tones or capabilities that you can cover. And again, that's not for everybody, but for me, it's really important to not have that ceiling on what it is I want to try and pursue.
So I guess like in a sense, that allows you much more. Well, I mean, you get more out of that than you would by having to. I guess also from a cost perspective is where I'm thinking of, where in the past you might have had to have a number of different pieces of equipment to get the same kind of flexibility. Now you can get it more conveniently just by simply plugging it into your rig and getting everything up and running.
100%.
Mhm.
I try to say, I like to think that I use a relatively simple setup as far as my tones go. I don't normally use a whole lot of crazy effects. There are three main sounds that I look for when I'm playing music. The first is a clean tone, which normally has a little bit of chorus and delay on it. The second is a dry, high gain, hard rock or metal rhythm tone, and it's completely dry. I don't use any effects on that. That is just straight amp. And then a lead tone, which I will normally put a boost pedal, a distortion pedal in front of to give me a little bit more gain to cut through the mix a little bit more, and a different delay setting. I used to have a refrigerator sized guitar rig that would have been completely worthy of touring, and I loved the rig. I absolutely did. But by the time it was all said and done, I managed to condense everything down to a cabinet, a power amp, and the Fractal Audio Axe effects. Had the best tone that I've ever had to this day, all of the capabilities I once had, and then some, in a lot less space, and ultimately less costly. And things like that, again, have translated into computers. These days, you can plug your guitar straight into a recording interface, whatever that recording interface may be. And through the technology of VST instruments, you can create on the computer very convincing and compelling guitar tones. So you can record direct and have nothing else with you and cut an entire album from it. People are doing it left and right.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, Billy, this is an interesting. Like, I wanted to actually move into this too because recently, a friend of ours, Eb Mike, put together a brand new computer for you. Because you're
Hmm.
also like JMB and myself, a gamer as well, and
Correct.
like, what are you starting to think of in terms of maybe even like just now, or like, what do you think of in terms of like expanding what you do into the digital field? I know when we talked earlier, you were talking about wanting to have more of an online presence and things like that.
Right.
How are you looking? like how has having the computer uh, available now and having all the other benefits that come along with it, especially considering I know the rig you got built, it's pretty sweet.
Yeah,
How is that like going to like what are the things you see yourself using that for as we go forward?
I would love to like maybe compose some music for Twitch streamers or YouTubers, maybe some intro outro music. Um, maybe record my own stuff, publish it. I'm completely open to it and kind of amazed at all the opportunities that are in front of me. To be honest with you, with the connections I've made over the years, maybe even like just sending an audio file to somebody instead of taking my stuff and going somewhere. Like I could just stay at my home or spend more time with my family. Um, and I'm as far as software and everything goes, I'm still kind of looking at everything. I'm not too sure what's good and what's not good yet. I'm open to suggestions from the both of you as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm completely open to what the future can hold for me. I always kind of have been that way.
I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely with I guess the rise over the last 20 years, really, I can't believe it. It's close to that now for YouTube and other items, other platforms like SoundCloud and even Spotify.
Hmm.
I mean, that really opens up a lot of opportunities for musicians in general. Like, I mean, it's a good and a bad thing, like you were saying, JMB. Because obviously, I think that does also cut down on what the amount of money people would get, be able to generate just off of that, just from the sheer amount of it that's available on the internet. Um, like what do you like? What would you like? I guess the best question really is, what would you like to see come of these things? Either of you could take this really, and just yeah.
For me, I have very limited expectations as to what could come from it or what I would like to come from it, if for no other reason than the fact that my expectations have already kind of been met and in some ways surpassed. Like I said before, if you're getting into the music industry now with the intention of making a living doing so, it's highly likely that you're going to end up disappointed. Right now, currently, my favorite band is Periphery, as I mentioned earlier.
So good.
They are amazing. Um, I've been following them, again, since before the band actually had a name. And it's been a very courtesy of the internet and forums and all of that stuff. And we're talking, MySpace days.
Oof.
It's been really um, educational to watch this band start as one person with a lot of ideas grow. And with their growth, their reach has become astronomical in that he started out as just a kid in a bedroom with some really good ideas and a crappy line 6 pod XT that I used to have, and believe me when I say it was crap.
Yep.
But at that time it was the most bang for the buck, and he had the latest at that time drum kit from hell and was able to program and record fairly convincing songs. Certainly things that were compelling and that you wanted to listen to and hear. And as time has gone on, we now have, I believe, Superior Drummer 3 just came out by Toontrack. It's the best sounding thing they've done. Adam Nolly Get Good, who was the bass player and engineer for Periphery, has released Get Good Drums, and they just released their Invasion pack. It sounds incredible. And these are all real drums that are recorded in various techniques, various velocities to allow people like us to be able to have studio quality sounding drums, the best drums on the planet with the best mics on the planet. And it gives you that option, that opportunity to put something out there that otherwise the world may never hear. So, I mean, when you talk about, expectations for these platforms, I'm honestly not sure how much better things can get for the little guy. And when I say the little guy again, I mean us. And again, the polar opposite side of this is that there's a lot of talented, well-known musicians out there who are in some ways being overlooked in favor of what I would often consider to be, and I may catch some flack for this, but lesser musicians. Like, I don't understand the Skrillex and dubstep movement.
Amen. Amen.
Um, I respect it because it's reaching people in the same way that I respect rap or country. I don't care for either of those genres, but I respect it because it reaches people. But you're basically sitting there in front of a computer using computerized noises. There are some melodies in there that are catchy and good, but then they're putting on concerts, and I don't understand. Well, are you hitting play and bobbing your head convincingly? I mean, I don't get it. I really don't. And that is just one of those negative things that comes from, advancing the way that we are. With every good will come some bad.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have to agree with you on a lot of that. And as far as it goes for catching flack for things, don't worry about that. We're going to be going into some things that I think Ruby's been touching on a little bit, going into some more sensitive topics here during the week. So we'll see if I catch some flack. It'll be real exciting what I got to say.
You've got more balls than me. I try to keep quiet these days. I
You
am
know,
a spoken prick.
I gotta just as an aside, there's just a lot of stuff that's been going on, mainly in the games industry, which is where I spend a lot of my time focused on. That I just can't keep my big dumb mouth shut, so I'm gonna be opening it this week a little bit more. But that being aside, I really want to kind of touch off on one last question that we talked about before, and then we're gonna kind of go into a little bit more of a free form discussion and such like that. Um, and that's music and games. Obviously, since video games became a thing in the late 70s, early 80s, and then up through the 80s and up to today, music has evolved in games and how it's been used in games. Uh, I'm going to start with you, Billy. What do you like about that, and what would you like to see more if there was something that you would like to see more of as far as its inclusion and its use in games?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I'd never truly appreciated or paid attention to music and games until I first played Destiny 1. When I first fired that game up and that music hits you, it sent it gave me goosebumps. It made the hair on my arm stand up. And since then, I mean, I would like to see, and then I once I heard the Destiny music, I got into um, kind of looking at past Bungie games and the Halo soundtrack, and gained an appreciation for that music, which I had heard people talking about for a long time and never really paid much attention to it. Um, I love an orchestral arrangement. I think it adds such an such an element to a game. It gives it feeling. It gives it emotion. And it's not that people don't or companies aren't using orchestrated music now, but I'm always a fan of that. I guess maybe bringing in some some more rock music aspects to games. I always feel like that adds a lot to a game as well. Heavy music is it's primal to me, and it stirs something inside of me personally. Whenever I hear like heavier music in a game, it really gets me going. Like the Devil May Cry games is a good example of that. Um, so yeah, I would kind of like to see more heavier music make its way into games as well.
JMB, thoughts?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'd like to touch on for that, which will either completely derail this or lead it in some more interesting directions. First and foremost, I think related to Billy's statement about heavier music reaching a primal part of you and getting things going. I think it's important to note, particularly during this podcast, that music is widely accepted as the most influential of all arts, dating back to as far as we can even think. Even if it was something as simple as rhythmic drumming and tribes, humming, things like that, whatever the case may be. I do believe that there is no more influential art than music. And that goes as far as there has now been studies done on how music affects the human body on a cellular level. And there's actually videos where you can see, if you're listening to classic music, your cells, they move a little bit, and no big deal. If you listen to heavy metal, like what Billy and I clearly like to listen to, your cells go into overdrive. There's actually been speculation that it could theoretically be damaging to a degree. If that's the case, I will die rhythmically happy with a smile on my face. All the same, though, when we're talking about how music has been more integrated into things like video games, and I'm going to take that a step further and talk about movies and TV series and things like that. I think one of the best things that has come from the rise in technology is the fact that once upon a time, these companies were, for all intents and purposes, unreachable. If you had a Nintendo or something like that and something went wrong, you could probably call them and get a little bit of assistance. But as far as receiving personalized comments related to something that you had to say, we can really think of things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook for that. And these social media platforms have been welcomed largely by these companies with open arms. And we've gone from companies that were essentially faceless and unreachable to, being able to reach out to Bethesda and on occasion maybe getting a reply to a concern that you have. And in that, these companies are integrating more with their buyers, the people of interest, which is how you get soundtracks, as Siege mentioned. Hello, by the way, Siege. Doom, an amazing soundtrack. And it wasn't done in-house by those people. Halo had a great soundtrack. And likewise, just to kind of talk a little bit about like Game of Thrones and Westworld, Ramin Djawadi, that guy is an amazing, amazing composer. And while I'm not going to sit here and insinuate that he would not have reached the level of notoriety that he has without the technology, I do firmly believe that the technology we have has given him a greater opportunity and a greater pathway to being able to put those ideas out there and be heard. And it just so happens that maybe over time he was able to have a real orchestra record these things. But I mean, I've seen his home studio. It's a nice studio. But going back to what Billy said earlier, it doesn't appear to me as a separate building in a different part of town with millions of dollars worth of gear in it. It's just ever so slightly nicer than a lot of home studios that I've seen. So, I mean, what do I want to continue to see? Not much, because we've reached a point where when Halo did their reissue, they reached out to Misha Mansour of Periphery, and he did 2 songs for the Halo reissue. And they weren't doom by any means, but they were heavier. They were very progressive. They were very Misha-esque. And, it's nice to pop in that disc and maybe hear a song like that and say, man, this is one of my favorite guitar players. This is great. I wouldn't mind seeing more inclusion in that regard, but I'm not going to sit here and sound entitled or, ungrateful for the inclusion that we have in such a short period of time.
Well said. Very well said. Actually, now that we've brought some of this stuff up, now we're going to kind of get a little bit more into free form here. One thing I want to say about this is something that I agree with a lot, is that, yes, social media has definitely opened things up. Actually, I think we're getting to a point in social media where we're reaching kind of a critical point where I would say things are hitting to that level where I think, especially in the world of video games, with everything that's happened within, let's say, the last 18 months, starting with the big thing with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and the backlash, the incredible backlash over that from the gaming community, I think we've started to see, and the rise, and this is again where I'm going to get into this a little bit more this week, the rise of the whole outrage culture, that we're kind of hitting a critical mass with social media. And I don't know how that is going to continue. I don't know what kind of impact I don't know if we're getting to a point now where that's gonna start to have more of a negative impact than it's gonna have a positive impact. But it's interesting to see where it's heading now. So I think you definitely hit on a very, very current events like nerve right there with how you said it's a lot of these things are welcome, but also these companies too are now starting to take a much more um cautionary look. I would say maybe that may not be the exact right word towards how they view social media.
100%. And, the outrage culture is kind of an interesting thing to touch on, in my opinion, because that has been, beyond a shadow of a doubt, at least in my opinion, one of the biggest detriments regarding social media is that it has given a lot of people who don't deserve a voice a platform to voice their uneducated or emotionally driven opinions. I'm not going to sit here and try to insinuate that, any one particular person is uh, deserving of being heard, whereas another is not. But if I'm also going to be completely honest, as I am, there are people like that. There are people who should not open their mouths. They jump to conclusions. They have these feelings based on uh, not facts, based on opinions and emotions. And we now have one of the downsides to being so connected with these companies is that people feel like something is owed to them. I've bought your games for such and such amount of time, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and blah 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 blah. And some of these complaints are fair. I myself do miss the times when you played a game and your DLC was something that you got after you beat the game, not something that they enticed you with to get another $60 out of you on top of the game that you've already spent $60 on. At the same time, I feel like there's a lot of people, we'll call them keyboard warriors, who will sit in front of their computers on social media just waiting for something to complain about, waiting for something to tweet and retweet and forward and follow me if you want more of this information on the bullshit that Bethesda's doing. Bah! And it's just, I'm afraid that whereas we've reached a point where these companies are reaching out and accepting of our opinions and the fact that we exist, I'm afraid that much in the same way that it took one person to run on stage with a gun and kill Dimebag Daryl during a Damage Plan show, it's not going to take long before these companies start saying, fuck this. This isn't worth it anymore. Shut it down. And we're going to have, a small margin of people to blame for it.
I agree with you, and I think part of the reason is people don't have any impulse control too. I think what happens is something will go on and something will happen and they'll immediately react from an emotional point, like Siege just said, and they won't think about what they're typing. They'll just type it and they'll put it out there, and it's so easy to do that that we wind up with a very uninformed discussion that comes out of the wrong place, rather than sitting back and taking some time to reflect on what just happened and then putting out a somewhat researched or more measured response, let's say, that some people need to take the time to do. Another example, and another thing that goes along with this is how companies also do the same thing now. Because if we look back to just this week, we had a big thing that happened in gaming that with the article that Jason Schreier wrote, which not more than an hour after it was published, a pre-typed, worded response from BioWare came out addressing the entire issue of Anthem, and it clearly showed that they didn't even bother reading the article and made some and they responded from, like you said, an emotional spot. And that's something I think that's going on all around. I think that's something that kind of disturbs me the most about the medium that we live in and the times that we live in right now. But to kind of steer this a little bit back in a different direction, I think there is something to be said going back to like soundtracks and things like that, and kind of want to go back towards this field of music, because believe me, we can definitely do a lot on the negatives and the impacts of social media on the world in general, not just music and not just video games. I mean, it's out there, and then I could do a documentary that'd be like 10 hours long on how fucked social media has made the world. But
crazy times we live in.
absolutely. But like, I'm looking right now at something like, as we were talking about before, filmmakers who generally seem to like how artists generally seem to be a little bit more available too. Like that's one thing I think that concerns me a little bit for for people who are recording albums and putting out music now. I think that they that have the social media, you know, they're on social media. And somebody puts out a song, and you have a bunch of people that maybe don't like it. You know, now they start flaming the artists, and now they start bothering the people that are recording it. That's got to be something that I think is not having a positive effect. Or maybe, you know, again, flip sided, people love the song, and then, you know, again, you get this great outpouring of love, but you're always going to have your fair share of detractors out there. You know, I can't imagine that necessarily being the most healthy thing for people that are looking to put out creative endeavors out there. I mean, I don't
That
know.
scare that scares me a little bit, to be honest with you. About putting, like, getting into like putting out my own music, like that terrifies me a little bit, to be honest with you. Because not all those opinions are genuine. I'm good with constructive criticism and feedback, but hating on something just to hate it and because someone else said to hate on it is just something I'm not behind and not okay with.
I agree. I think this could turn into a total meme moment, but I think Nickelback is a prime example.
Hmm.
Look, if you look at, the majority of their individual and earlier songs from a completely unbiased perspective, songs like Photograph, as overplayed as it is and as formulaic as it may be, is actually an incredibly well written song that tells a very easy to follow story.
Hmm.
The harmonies, I mean, they're all exceptionally talented musicians, whether you like their personalities or the music they write or not. The talent is there. And much as we've touched on before in like Danica's community, for example, it's a fad to hate on Nickelback.
Hmm.
Now, I will be the first person to admit that since Mike Portnoy's departure from Dream Theater, I have had a little bit of a hard time with some of their recent releases. Their new album, Distance Over Time, is, in my opinion, the best thing they've done since Black Clouds and Silver Linings, which was the last album that Mike Portnoy is part of. And it has been a little difficult for me to swallow as somebody who was such a huge fan of this band and the individual members for so long. That being said, what did I not do? I did not go on social media and write a 3-page article about why the new album sucks or why the new album doesn't reach me. What I opted to do instead was just not listen to it. You know, certain moments I like, sure. Metallica, same example. Look, I'm not a huge Metallica fan. Personally, I believe Metallica is overrated. I know that touches a lot of people in the wrong way. They certainly had their moments. But the fact that Kirk Hammett is constantly in the top 5 guitarists of all time fucking breaks
Uh,
my balls.
yeah.
He had some amazing studio moments. He's a great writer. He is a fucking sloppy guitar player. Period. End of discussion. Watch any Metallica live video for more than 10 minutes, and that becomes very evident. But I still respect what they did. The Black Album has to be one of their least uh, enjoyed albums among their critical fans. And you know what? I really like that album.
I love that album.
It's a good album. Songs like Of Wolf and Man are incredibly underrated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The God That
Um,
Failed, also another personal
So
favorite of
good.
mine from that album.
yeah, exactly. That's not to say that they didn't have better albums. That's not to say that they didn't have worse albums. Death Magnetic, um, all this, all the or Saint Anger, all a couple of them, all the same. Um, people. Look, I'm all for venting. I really am. You gotta vent, but people I feel abuse these platforms and often abuse the notoriety that they have, and sometimes seem to think of themselves as omnipotent beings with infallible opinions and facts behind them, and that's just not the case. Look, I'm not a huge fan of Toto, but I absolutely believe that they have earned all of their accolades with what they've done.
I did not expect to get a Toto comment tonight. Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
It's out of nowhere.
I'm digging that. Um, I mean, like, I completely agree. Like on a topic of just bands in general, I'm right up. See, when Mangini took over for Portnoy, I liked Mike Mangini as a drummer. Like, I thought he was a great drummer. I thought he brought he had his own flair. He definitely has what I would consider to be a more elaborate kit than Portnoy did looks wise. Although Portnoy's never been one to shirk at having way too many drums up on stage sometimes. But I think Portnoy as an artist is just a fantastic drummer. He's right after Neil Peart. There's Portnoy. It's always been kind of my tied for number one, if you know what I mean.
100%. And here's the thing.
Yeah,
Mangini is a machine. There's nothing that man cannot do. He plays those parts to the letter and nails them almost every time. He is a phenomenal drummer, and he, again, like several other artists we've mentioned tonight, has absolutely earned all of his accolades. However, one thing that was underrated, at least from my perspective, was Mike Portnoy's influence on the musical aspect of the band more so than just the rhythmic aspect of the band. He was not only the driving force behind a lot of their DVDs, a lot of their advertisements, a lot of their artwork, he was also an integral part of the arrangement of their songs, their albums, etc. And if you look back on behind the scenes videos, you can actually see videos like him and John Petrucci discussing, possibly rearranging how this guitar riff goes, or looking at Jordan Rudess and saying, man, that's really cool, but maybe try it with this sound instead. And, as it turns out, again, this is not to say that Dream Theater is bad by any means now, but I do not feel that they reach the same level they once did. And as much as I hate to say it, because I was very disappointed in a lot of the ways that Mike Portnoy publicly handled his departure from the band, I now must attribute a lot of that artistic integrity to his influence.
Well, he could have definitely handled the departure a little bit better, to say the least. I do think that, well, first of all, I think that just the amount of his, the amount of stuff he's put out in the same time that he's been away from the band, as I would say, is almost that's a good point, CNB. Yeah, I do. Well, I kind of feel bad for both Portnoy and Mangini's drum techs, because holy hell, those are big kits. Those are very big, elaborate kits. But oh yeah, that's true too. I didn't think about Terry Bozzio, but you're right. Oh my god. Forgive me if I get some things wrong. I'm still dealing with allergies.
I derailed you.
Wow, that's crazy. But yeah, there were a lot of things out there. I actually spent much more of my life into music than, with almost the same vim and vigor that I go into video games, except a little bit more for music, because music actually hits me at a really deeper spot, I guess, in my soul, if you want to put it a certain way, where I can sit there and turn on music, close my eyes, and go on an adventure, and see an entire story unfold in the minutes that music's on. Which one of the reasons, I like one of my favorite bands that I kind of came on was, aside from Dream Theater, was Blind Guardian from Europe. They were one of the ones that hit me pretty well, as far as weaving together some orchestral pieces, as well as just that old school metal that goes along with it. And a lot of things come out of Europe that I find myself finding to listen to. What do you guys think of some of the power metal and some of the Viking rock and things that have come out of, and Viking metal that have come out of Europe in the last, let's say, 20 years?
Nope.
Yeah, not my thing.
That's fair.
Yeah. I'm into more like Seven Dust and Periphery and bands like that. I'm really kind of, in the last few years, have been on a genty heavy metal kind of thing going right now.
To bands like Periphery, Tesseract, Monuments, Architects, stuff like that.
Yep, absolutely. Seven Dust is probably, oh man, I love that band so much. I love them so much.
They put on an amazing show. I've seen them a couple of times now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely go. I enjoy all types. I mean, I still find myself going back. Lately, I've been on an Anthrax kick.
Ooh.
I can't. Yeah. There's something about just old school Anthrax, even newer Anthrax, that gets me. One of the things when they put out their Anthems album, Holy crap! When they did the Thin Lizzy cover,
Mhm.
it sounded like Thin Lizzy, like, and they actually managed to also sound like Rush on the same album. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" You know, especially considering Anthrax kind of hits a little bit home for being from New York for the most part. Um, like I just can't get over some of the fact that like I still love the big four of thrash, and I those that will always kind of have a special place in my heart from growing up and just listening to that and still listening to that. I think it's amazing when I play some of that music and people come into my stream, like if I'm just kind of zoning out and playing that during a game, some people are still like, "Who the fuck are you listening to?" And they're awesome. Who are they? I'm not gonna lie. I think that's part of the reason I like to stream is because a chance for me to share some of the music that I loved growing up with people that maybe haven't heard of it, you know. And that's one of the things I think that's actually kind of cool about the streaming format, at least. Even though half the time my VODs get blacked out from audio.
Yeah.
Something else that I think has been really beneficial and in some ways crucial regarding streams is the amount of artists who have, whether they're playing their own music or playing covers, have started streaming their music, performing live streams to the degree that I'm not sure I'll actually be able to because the laptop I have is kind of underwhelming in regards to power. But I've been toying around with the idea of at least attempting to live stream one of the practice sessions for my band Pyramidian, Pyramidia, of which we are in the process of writing an album. I think we've got about 12 tracks finished right now and 3 or 4 that are still kind of in the works. And yeah, just for fun, just to say hi to people, and not really consider it a performance, but to be, I guess, a little bit more social with it. And even if it's just something like Facebook Live, I think it's very cool that that opportunity is there. That you can actually press a button and do something like that.
One of my favorite Twitch streams to watch lately has been Matt Hafey from Trivium. He streams his vocal and guitar warm ups when he's not touring or or like when he's preparing to go on tour. And it is one of the funnest streams to watch. It's such a cool thing to just witness his routine. And he plays scales and he'll go through vocal warm ups. It's just really interesting to watch stuff like that. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen or heard of that band, Trivium.
I've heard of
Yeah,
Trivium, yeah.
I've actually seen a little bit of Matt Heafy's streams. I don't really sit in there. Believe it or not, I spend a lot less time on Twitch than a lot of people would think. But I mean, that's another thing that I think has been really advantageous about technology is you can go out on YouTube and find a plethora of vlogs that touring musicians have done, even if it's just as simple as, well, I woke up today, I slept about 2 hours, we were on the bus for about 7 hours, we're here in Kentucky, and oh, by the way, the PA is broken. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into live performances, even just as a local band, that
Mhm.
people don't understand, to the degree that I used to give guitar lessons locally. And I would always ask my students, regardless of what their age was, what is your goal from playing guitar? What is it that you want to accomplish? And I was always mortified when I got the answer, I want to be a rock star. And
Ugh.
this half-hour lesson is going to be spent telling you why that's not a good idea. And then we can decide if you still want to play music.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the Article 13 question that Siege brought up, let me explain that. In Europe, in the EU, they had this thing, Article 11, Article 13. Really, I'll TLDR it. Basically, it's once copyright holders to or let's say platforms to be responsible to copyright holders for either licensing music or any copyrighted material before it's presented over the internet for free. You know, it has to do with copyright violations. One of
Mm.
the things that I think and I'll kind of feel this because this is something we've been dealing with a lot in terms of the YouTube channels that are coming out there, and some of the friends I have in Europe that are content creators are really the ones that are super concerned about this. I think in terms of music, if you are the copyright holder for your music, I don't think it'll be a big issue since you're the one who owns the copyright, so you therefore have control over that. When it comes into an issue is when, let's say, a record label like Nuclear Blast, for instance, let's say they have the copyright to some of the music on an album or one of their releases, unless YouTube pays them directly for that license to be on a specific channel, it could become an issue. But that remains to be seen how it's going to be handled. I know it was passed. I also think it was incredibly stupid how that law was passed, because it only passed by a few votes, and some of the people didn't clearly understand what they were voting on, and therefore it might have actually changed the outcome of that. So it remains to be seen what will entirely happen with that yet. But I think that's an interesting question. It's something that I don't know if you two are 100% aware of, but it could definitely be something that it's mainly going to stem from Europe, but it'll also have an effect, of course, globally, because you're going to lose a lot of ability to handle things, and I'm sure other companies or other countries will then start to look into passing similar laws. This generally tends to be the case.
I'm not terribly familiar with it, but if it is anywhere near as cut and dry as what you're talking about, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that even here in America, we're already kind of dealing with something similar, in that if you upload a video to YouTube, for example, I was in a band up until 2018 called the Blue Diamond Band. I played bass with them, but one of the things that we did was I would pick up the guitar, and whenever I did, we had 3 guitar players on stage, an acoustic and 2 electric, um, and we would do a cover of Hotel California. And as far as I could tell, we were the only band locally who ever actually did the full double guitar solo. And we did it for a gig one night. I took the video of it, and our arrangement is slightly different. It's not one of those we play it note for note, it's sang in the same key kind of thing. It is its own thing. And I uploaded it to YouTube, and it was blocked here in America. Now, other people outside of America can see it, but it was straight blocked here for not even trying to do anything monetarily with it. You can stretch that out even further. And let's say you upload a vlog that has a Metallica song on it. Well, one of a couple of things is going to happen. It's either going to get blocked. You could get a copyright strike. And what seems to most frequently happen is they say there is copywritten music in this video, and you cannot monetize this video. In fact, any monetization that does come of that video will therefore go to the artist. And I think those things are fair. And it has, once again opened up a platform for people to have copyright-free music, which is something that vloggers are big on. No matter what you get from this website, if you pay your monthly whatever, you have access to this song forever. Even if you use the song and you stop paying monthly, that song is still yours. You can monetize your videos and everything is okay. I don't think it's too far off of what we're already dealing with. And, it's kind of a shame, but it's just one of those things where, I think the driving force behind a lot of this are well-known artists like Taylor Swift, who are bitching and complaining about not getting enough. Now, it's really easy for me to sit here and say, well, you're a multimillionaire. Do you really need more than 6 cents per play on your song? Well, you know what? That's really not for me to decide. But the reality is, I think a lot of it's going to stem from that. And, we may very well be heading for another Napster Metallica battle at some point. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. What I can tell you is there's a lot of artists that I've become fans of due to finding videos of them online or hearing people stream them that I otherwise would never have been exposed to.
I mean, I have to say that I personally, I'm going to wait and see what happens. I mean, there's been a lot of activity about it as far as from the YouTube community in particular. I think that largely has to do with people being concerned as to whether or not they're going to be able to. The main people I think that are going to really have an issue are like the people that say, let's say those people that make a remix of Ninja's, streams, and then they do all these streamer fails of the week or whatever. Those are the people I think that are going to largely be affected by that. And if I'm honest, my opinion on that is it doesn't really take a lot to make a video off of somebody else having talent or doing something out there. I'm not personally going to miss those channels, but that's me. But it's and I think that partially comes from I can certainly, as somebody who now fully understands what it is to produce something like even this podcast takes hours of pre-production to get this running, and there's a lot of planning and everything else. And I'm not even one of the bigger ones out there. Like I'm a small fry, and you look at somebody like, let's say, Joe Rogan when he does his podcasts. That takes hours, if not weeks, of preparation to get somebody out there, to book people, to get everything out there. And yeah, I think it's something that, to have some like 20 something sit in their basement and pull some clips out there. It might be something. Um, it might be something that would be not necessarily something I would miss. Let's say out there, and I think that kind of goes like that. But I also, I'm also not a big fan of censorship. I'm not a big fan of people not being able to share things, especially since this is a medium. There are mediums out there that exist simply to help you find new bands. Again, that's how I found a lot of the music that I like to listen to now. So I agree with you there at the same point, imJMB. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of like a little bit of like, I could go one way or the other. At the end of the day, am I going to lose sleep over it? No. But that's just me.
I think we can sum it all very simply with one very stern sentence, which is "fuck Europe." Just kidding. It's just a joke.
Fuck Europe until they need us. Then it's hey Europe. No, I have no problem with anybody in Europe. But that's funny. That will be a funny clip. Maybe. But I mean, overall, I kind of want to just hop back into one thing in music. It would be really remiss of me to do a podcast on music with people that are musicians without kind of getting a couple of really, really cliche and overused top 5 lists. So we're gonna do it. It's gonna happen.
9 inches.
So I'm gonna go. We're gonna take this down in order, no specific order. So JMB and then Billy, I want your top 5 favorite albums that you have. This might be a little bit of a harder question than you think sometimes, but go ahead and give me your top 5 albums for you. Personally.
Yeah, that is kind of tough. I have to be honest and say that just because it came out this week and I've been listening to it nonstop, Hail Stand by Periphery has to be one of the first ones thought of. Dream Theater's 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence was huge for me because it covered such a broad spectrum of music and ideas. Permanent Waves by Rush was a pretty remarkable influence on me. I hate to be that guy and use the same band twice, but Black Clouds and Silver Linings by Dream Theater also opened up a lot of different perspectives as far as doors for me goes. And the last one's kind of tough to pick because there's a lot of albums that I love by a lot of different bands, but if I was going to try and say one album or one more album that really, really moved me, it would probably be Blackbird by Alter Bridge.
Good band.
It's fair. Billy?
Let's say probably Seven Dust's first 1997 album, self-titled. Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind. Man, pretty much anything from Pantera. Eagles Hotel California. Led Zeppelin 4. Is that cliche?
That's cliche, but that's good. That's fair. I like the way you pose that as a question. Like, is that... That's good. I would have to say for me, number one most influential album is actually going to be Paul Simon Graceland. Because it was one of the first albums I ever got. And there's so much to say about Paul Simon's influence just on music in general, but that would be one of them in my top five. Um, I would have to say Metallica's Black Album, because that was a transitional piece and it had a lot of music on it that I really, really liked. It hit me at just the right time that I really just there was a lot of the it's not the big songs that came off the album, the ones that they play on tour. It's the other songs on that album, like The God That Failed and things like that, that just had enough of a different sound, but that were also just dark, and that really spoke to me at the time.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah,
In regards to the Black Album, can I just say, like, that whole album, I have to say, Enter Sandman is probably my least favorite song that Metallica's ever done.
that's
And I know
fair.
it had so much commercial success, and it really kind of took them to a new level. But man, oof.
I actually have to agree with you. That's not one of my favorite tracks on the album. I would actually have to say for my next pick, I would have to go Dream Theater. I actually have to. Was it Scenes from a Memory?
Great album.
That's one of my favorite ones. Um, for me, it's going to be pretty much anything by Rush. I have to just put that out there. It depends on what mood I'm in, whether I go early Rush from the early to mid 70s, or from the mid to late 70s, or if I go like kind of experimental, like Hold Your Fire kind of out style, or if I go to their more recent one, like the last one, which I still think as the last studio album, Clockwork Angels, is probably the one that harkens back to the old school Rush. It's definitely heavier. It's also tells a fantastic story, and really Neil wrote an amazing book that goes along with that album that was just absolutely a phenomenal read. So I can't recommend that one enough. Clockwork Angels is definitely one of my favorites. And as far, I think, what was that, 3 or 4 for me. I'm I'm old. You'll have to forgive me.
I'm a
Um,
musician. We can't count.
that's okay. That's good. We'll go with the Danica no math thing. Um, I'd have to go for my number one album for me would be. Oh, this is going to be a hard one to pick, but I would actually have to go for me with. And this isn't actually going to be a rock album. It is going to be. No, wait, maybe it is. It's going to be actually a Billy Joel album. It's going to be the the album with "We Didn't Start the Fire." I'm forgetting what it's called. I think it was Stormfront. Billy Joel Stormfront. That's it. Because "We Didn't Start the Fire" is the actual song that got me into history, which is what I have my Bachelor of Arts degree in.
Hmm.
And it is still one of the best songs as far as for me. It is one of the best songs that has a little bit of an anthem for where I went in my professional life, although I don't really use history anymore. It's still one of the greatest loves of my life. As odd as that is to say, I'm one of those people that literally sit there and go, well, this is mistakes have happened before in history, and I just kind of sit there and shake my head at the world. But
As you
that's
watch it burn.
oh yeah, I mean, and I take pleasure in knowing that at least this fire ain't my fault. But others definitely have been, but that one at least isn't. Um,
At least the
like
other ones have all been able to be taken care of by cream or antibiotics.
pretty much, yeah, right. Uh, man. So listen. In closing, I'm gonna start wrapping this down a little bit, but so Billy, tell me a little bit about what you got going on, what you're looking forward to, things like that. As far as yeah, just in general. What's your next thing that you're working on, and what are you looking forward to the most?
Well, lately I've been just kind of sitting in with friends, bands, playing live right now. And the future is pretty much wide open for me. I'm open to all opportunities and always willing to to listen to opportunities and things that come my way. I'm hoping to start, like I told you guys tonight, record some of my own music. Maybe try to start getting it out there. But I'm hesitant. But we'll see how that goes as time moves on.
Very cool. JMB?
Well, my main priority right now is, tidying up a couple of life events, finishing up a renovation on the house, things like that. In the meantime, generally once per weekend, generally, not always, but I get together with my band Pyramidia and we try to continue the writing process, or at the very least, stay up to date as far as technical ability on current songs we've got going on. I did fail to mention earlier that that is kind of a progressive rock, jazz, fusion type project. We're not really sticking with one hardcore genre. I think we have things that span, a little bit of Rush flavor, a little bit of Metallica flavor, a little bit of things like Guthrie Govan and the Aristocrats, albeit not quite as technological or technically advanced. That's my fault because I've been slacking on the practice. But other than that, everything's pretty copacetic. I'm looking forward to Periphery finishing up this tour and then doing a headlining tour where hopefully they'll come somewhere within an hour or two of me and I can see some Hail Stan live.
Nice. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing that's very important. I love the band Clutch. I just wanted to get that out there.
Good band.
I should probably look a little bit more into them. Nothing comes to mind.
I have to say this. So their newest album that they had out, most recent one anyway, they did a video for it that was called Hot Bottom Feeder. It was all about the lead singer's actual recipe for making crab cakes. And the video was him making crab cakes. It was amazing. And that's one of the reasons I love Clutch.
That is one thing that I certainly don't want to prolong your ability to leave because I know you got stuff going on, but something that, I think once again is directly related to, the internet and social media and all that is that it's okay, again, for the first time in a very, very long time, for bands to have a sense of humor and for them to execute that sense of humor, not only on stage, but in interviews, in their recordings. I mean, Hail Stan, that's a pretty comical album title. They end the whole album after this brilliant 9-minute song with the phrase "suck my balls," and they're doing it for them. They're enjoying themselves. Steel Panther is a prime example. They're so fucking talented.
So good.
They are amazing. I saw them at Welcome to Rockville, and out of all 3 days, and CNB Live, if he's still here, can attest to this, they had the best sound and were easily one of the best performers of those days. First time I'd ever seen them and fell in love. They don't take themselves seriously. Their songs are all jokes, but they're so damn good. And it's okay to be like that. And I appreciate that. As opposed to a lot of the old school thinking of you can't smile on stage, you can't laugh on stage, you can't joke on stage. God forbid you grab the drummer's cymbal right as he hits it and it makes a click sound instead of a nice splash. And the leader of your band looks at you like, what the fuck are you doing? Can you guess I've been there?
Maybe just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I'm not bitter.
Well, it has been a pleasure and an actual blast to have you guys on. I really appreciate it. Once again, I want to thank my good friends imJMB and Billy Boomer. Their social media and all of their links are scrolling by in chat. If you want to toss them a follow, go check them out. Also, tomorrow I will be doing the next podcast, which will be an early podcast on rating and MMOs, which should be exciting. We're going to be doing that with Destiny Fighter D. So that will be a one-on-one podcast. Again, I will be presenting it from the form of a WoW raider, and she will be talking about it from the perspective of somebody who raids pretty hardcore in Final Fantasy XIV. That being said, once again, a huge thanks to JMB and Billy for coming out tonight. I appreciate you guys both. You guys are awesome.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'd like to have, we will probably be doing some more of these. I think JMB and maybe you, me, and Ruby will sit down one night and going and doing a little bit more of just having this thought of kind of a commentary on social media and kind of doing something a little bit spicy like that.
We are so going to get you banned.
Oh, that'll be fine. We'll film that all for YouTube. It'll be amazing. But that being said, I want to thank everybody else out there, all of you guys who came out to hang out with us tonight. I appreciate that. This will be going, I will be editing this a little bit, not really too much has to be edited tonight. Well, we're going to be putting this up on YouTube in the next week or two. This episode will be up, actually, probably later this week. I have a couple of episodes to catch up on since I was away last week. As always, when we end our podcast and any stream we end here, I like to find somebody to host and go show some love to a friend or another streamer out there. And so if you all just hang out with me for a quick sec, we're going to go ahead and then I will toss a host on up. So thank you once again, everybody, for coming out tonight. I hope you have a fantastic evening and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Just bear with me for a few seconds. And guys, feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
Suck my balls.
I mean, appropriate.
Oh.
It wouldn't have been good without the sound effect, let's be honest.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we're going to go actually host our guest from last night, Danny DPS. She's currently playing Persona 5, so let's go over and say hi to Danny. Once again, thank you, everybody, and have a fantastic weekend.
Good night, folks.
Good night, guys.
I like.
Ever hear about the time Big Jim went head to head with a tornado?
Thank you so much, guys.
Oh,
Thanks for having us.